Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening is Adam White. With one cup final in the rear-view mirror, another is now on the horizon, but who will be occupying it? All of that and more after the latest headlines. Rennes outlasted Lyon 3-2 to advance to the Coupe de France final on Tuesday night. Rami Bensebaini's winner put pay to Bruno Genesio's reported new contract as virtues seem to circle above Legon for that head coaching job. The Brittany side will be meeting Paris Saint-Germain, who won 3-0 over Nantes on Wednesday. Kylian Mbappe scored and missed a penalty, while Koulibaly saw red for two bookable offences for the defeated Canaries. In Ligue 1, Strasbourg picked up right where they left off by winning the Coupe de Ligue final with a thumping 4-0 win over high-flying Reims, as Genk continued to bury their hands in the sand with a 2-0 loss at Montpellier. That's all for now, but remember, for all the latest news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We'll start this week with those cup games, and Adam, the more interesting one, I suppose, for most listeners will be the fact that Rennes are in the final. A lot of hope that Lyon would kind of get there, given that they've been PSG's kryptonite, but they couldn't quite outlast the Britain side. But a little bit of a funny affair after the game, because we were all anticipating from reports beforehand that Genesio was going to be announced on a new 2-year deal, but that did not seem to suffice.
No, it didn't. It was the Keep were reporting over the weekend and earlier this week that it was sort of been up in the air, hasn't it, all season. We seem to discuss Genesio's future on a regular basis, and his contract was coming to the end of last season, and he got an extension for this season, and it seemed that he was going to be offered a new 2-year deal with an option for a third based on Champions League qualification over the next few seasons. And at the time, it seemed a little bit of a formality given how strong the reports were. But as you mentioned, Lyon failed to win the semi-final with Rennes on Tuesday night, and it turns out that contract offer was conditional on Lyon making the Champions League at the end of the season and making the Coupe de France final, and one of those objectives already hasn't been fulfilled. And there was sort of a bizarre situation after the game where that sort of contract was sort of rejected, and you all asked the Lyon president Jean-Michel Aulas, battling with reporters and the like, and Genesio seems to act like he's out now, that there's no way back from this situation. That's the sense that I get, the feeling I get from the press conference and the news that's come out since. And Genesio sort of talking, I think he was quoted as saying, "I'm going to leave the club as I found it in the Champions League," so which suggests he thinks that the deal is done. And it's a bizarre situation. I mean, because to make such a huge decision based on the result of one game, I realised that it was a relatively important game, but in the sort of the medium term future. But although you're absolutely right that Lyon are PSG's bogey team to some extent, but I still would have felt that PSG would have been huge favourites at the final, and Lyon have only been PSG's bogey team at home at Parc OL at the Groupama Stadium, and they haven't threatened them at all outside of that context. So getting to a final and losing, as opposed to being a losing semi-finalist, I don't know if that's enough to say this manager is good enough for us or this manager isn't good enough for us. So an unusual situation, but seems like Genesio is finally, after sort of he's the manager of 9 lives in French football. It seems like he's finally on his way out, and talk of Rafa Benitez and one or two others, which would be interesting. But yeah, it seems like changes afoot at Lyon.
Yeah, probably in a sense rightfully so. I think if you're flip-flopping that much on someone based on one result, then you weren't really that committed in the first place. An entertaining game though, and credit to Rennes, some great goals in this one, and so it felt like for a time that they went in front through Mbaye Niang, a good crossing and a bit of lackadaisical defending, but they got themselves ahead. But then mysteries expired for them to sort of lose that advantage. Bertrand Traore with an excellent goal from just inside the box, sneaking in the corner. Not much of a celebration, which was a little bit strange, but I suppose more the seriousness. But at the same time, they hit straight back again. Benjamin Andre scored. Then it was the equaliser again for Lyon, but they never really looked secure. And again, defensive mistakes creep in, and Rami Ben Saïbaini gets that all-important goal with about 9 minutes to go, just outside the box, and it's a big win for them, isn't it? I mean, it's been a really interesting season, especially under Stefan so far. But I mean, I don't think in the wildest dreams Rennes fans would have thought, possibly, obviously, a European run in terms of getting in the league terms, getting towards Europe, which is a little bit further off than they maybe hoped, but getting to a big tie in a round of 16 in the Europa League and to a Coupe de France final, that's exactly the kind of season that these mid-table to upper half table sides are dreaming of.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's actually, when you think about it along those lines, it's actually been a really productive season for Rennes. You know, they made progress in the Europa League to some extent, as you mentioned, and you know, a cup final, you can't really sniff at that, and they're not necessarily out of the race for a top 5 place. I know that they're on 41 points in 10th, and Marseille are 5th with 48. But they have a game in hand, so you never know that if they get the win there, they're 4 points back, and there's a lot of teams in contention. You know, even Strasbourg have sort of fought their way back in. Nice, Montpellier, Reims, Marseille, Saint-Etienne, all pretty tightly bunched. So that's not over by any means yet. So I think this is a step in the right direction for Rennes. They will be disappointed to not get consecutive seasons in the Europa League, because I guess becoming European regulars is the next step for their club, and that's kind of the way they've been trending over the last maybe 18 months or so. You know, that's their goal this year with Lamucci, when he did really well to get them into Europa League last year. Would have been to do it again. That probably would have been their first choice, if you like, their main target. Because to progress, you would become European regulars, as Saint-Etienne have done, as Bordeaux have done, and they want to, they see themselves as in that group, and that probably won't be achieved. But they're not by any means out of it yet. But yeah, absolutely, to fight to come across Julian Stefan and who seems to be such a fantastic coach, and he's really got the best out of the squad and got the best out of the season. He's kind of, from when he took over, to stay in the European race, have a brilliant run in the Europa League by their standards, get out of the group and really do that. Their game at home against Arsenal will be remembered for a long time, and to get to the Coupe de France final, and it's not beyond the round's possibility that they could win that cup, and that would be huge. And so yeah, so I think overall it's a season that they can be pretty pleased with, and keeping Stefan on board would be pretty crucial going forward. And they look like a club on the up. They always seem to have this one moment where they look like something's going to happen, and they look like they're going to push on, and then it kind of, like as it did with Lamucci this season, kind of disintegrates. But I think there's a little bit more stability at Rennes based on the way Stefan goes about his business, and the fact that they've put together a really good squad. So I think I'd back them to just keep going and see if they can get back into Europe next season. Yeah,
and it's an interesting catch-22, I suppose, for them, because obviously the cup final, should they win it, gives them Europa League place. If they lose it opens 6th up, which is comfortably achievable, really.
I was thinking about this today. Because it's top 4 it's because Strasbourg have the 6th place effectively, so it's top 4 in the league, and then if PSG win, that will drop to 5th, and then the 6th place team would have been, because PSG normally win both cups, but normally last 4 years they've done it, so they would drop. That would then be the 6th place, but because Strasbourg won, they take the 6th place. So for 5th to be a Europa League place, PSG need to win the cup, I think. So 6th is, unless Strasbourg finish in the top 5, 6th I think is kind of out of the situation now.
Oh, right. Okay, I was trying to work out how many teams went to the Europa League. I couldn't quite remember.
It is convoluted, isn't it? Like last season, would end up being 3 teams in the Champions League group stages because Marseille got to the final stuff. Yeah, it's really convoluted.
Yeah, and much like, excuse me, I mean, they might be a little bit miffed around that it's not the sort of old format of doing it where the losing finalists sometimes got a cup place. The same with, I know that was the case in England for a long while as well. But
I think it was a UEFA thing. I think they changed the rules, like sort of across the board, and that changed, unfortunately, because that was quite a nice way to do it. It gave some teams more to play for.
I get why, because sometimes they were bringing in, I mean, there was a couple of years where Stoke City, I think, were in the the Europa League for that kind of thing. I think it was the year that Hull got there. Did they get the Europe?
Yeah, they went out in the qualifiers, didn't they? And Stoke did do all right. I remember them playing Valencia. Did they get a result? I think they lost in Valencia. Maybe got a result at home, perhaps. But I think the competition of the quality competition is higher if you just do league places, I guess, isn't it? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Rennes have got a difficult task really on the final, because the sort of expected result, I suppose, came in the other game as Paris Saint-Germain got a comfortable 3-0 win over Nantes, who didn't trouble them. They had a couple of moments where they thought they could have got a penalty shout. There was a strange moment for the Kylian Mbappe's first penalty where he scored it first of all, but then encroachment, which is the first time I've seen encroachment in about a year, I think, given on any in anywhere in Europe, really, more than anything. And the retaken penalty was saved, and then the second time they got a penalty, he only just about squeezed it in, but they were pretty dominant throughout. A lovely Dani Alves goal, if you can catch it, a lovely little lob into the top left-hand corner, but pretty much as we expected, really. It's the funny thing sometimes of covering PSG, Adam, is that especially against a Nantes team that have pretty much not had the greatest second half of the season, and the Cup was the only thing that we were sort of going through, but did face a lot of lower league teams before getting to this stage. It was as expected and much of the same, and PSG will be, out of anything, desperate to get an extra cup in their saddle, because losing to Rennes in that final would be pretty devastating for what had been a pretty positive season.
Yeah, I think it definitely would be. I mean, I'm fairly sure that the sort of expected, season goals from PSG are win the league, win at least one of the cups, and progress in the Champions League. And given that they kind of crashed out the Coupe de Ligue, rather unfortunately, they're going to win the league. And the Champions League, you could argue that they made some progress, but ended up with what I would argue, definitely since QSI took over, was the worst defeat in their history since QSI took over. Arguably, since they were formed in 1970, probably the worst. In context, perhaps the worst night in the club's history. So the Coupe de France is a must, really, from their point of view. There isn't really two ways about it. They sort of have to win. I don't think it'll affect, if they were to somehow lose to Rennes, I don't think it would affect Thomas Tuchel's future necessarily, but perhaps it would give him less sort of capital, if you like, going forward, and that next season would perhaps be on a shorter leash, or a shorter. There'd be less patience from people above him at the club if he were to start slipping up. I don't see either of those things happening, but yeah, I think it's pivotal for them. And you mentioned Nantes now. I think it's really shame we won't get our Rennes versus Nantes derby final. That would have been fantastic at the Stade de France. But I think they just need to regroup, don't they, and start again next season.
Yeah, it's not the greatest of time for Le Canary. Not only the obvious fact of still recovering from the loss of Emiliano Sala in more ways than one, but also the fact that the legal battle with Cardiff is going to probably drag on now until the summer comfortably. Whether they will even see the full £50 million will be sort of up to FIFA nowadays. I know the sort of update today was the FA had not put it in their report for transfer simply because of sort of FIFA rulings and Cardiff claiming this, that, and the other. But we shall wait and see what sort of like, and we'll pretty much have it first once we learn what they get. But that cash injection will be massive for them in the summer. I mean, it could mean they could bring in 3 or 4 players, and without it means they might be stuck there and in real trouble next season if they can't really bring anyone in for the club, which would be a massive blow for them. On to some league affairs that we saw in midweek, because the Coupe de Ligue finalists got their league games out of the way in midweek, and we'll come on to Gammon Cup in the moment because we mentioned it might be a bit more important to them than to Strasbourg. But after being asleep since they got qualified for the final, they finally got that out of the way, and they give Reims, of all people, a bit of a hammering, really. I know Reims had a couple of chances, but Strasbourg pretty dominant. A little bit surprising, really, to given that what had gone before, but it's almost like they flicked back on the switch and they're back in the groove. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's almost kind of natural for a team in their position, because given their history, their recent history, they were cup winners sort of a couple of times relatively recently. 2008, in 2005, maybe that decade they were cup winners, and to drop all the way down to the 5th division and to almost reform and to fight their way back up. That cup final, given it was against Guingamp, was such a huge opportunity for them. A club like Strasbourg, when they make a final of late, it's been against PSG, and although it was a great achievement to make the final, they don't hold much hope of winning. And we've seen that with Angers and even further back, like Bastia getting to the final of a cup. Lille, when they weren't playing particularly well, got to the final, and it was almost a bit of a formality. But for both teams, but for Strasbourg especially, given how well they played up to that point, it was only natural that it was such a huge opportunity that was not going to come around again anytime soon, given the strength of PSG, given the strength of even teams like, I know they've beaten Lyon, really caused some issues of late, but the strength of those sort of Monaco and Lyon as well of late. Maybe that's sort of such a huge opportunity to win a final like that won't come around again for decades, maybe, given those factors I just covered there. So it's only natural to really just to given how close that mid-table is, to lose a little bit of intensity and to lose a little bit of fight, because perhaps you don't want to be injured for that final, and even Thierry Loret is looking towards it as well, and the whole club, other fans are, that's the whole focus, because that is their season really, I guess. I mean, making Europe will be wonderful too, and they may still do that, but that's where it sort of all lays, if you like. So yeah, so I think that this performance against Reims has kind of been coming a little bit, because now that cup final is over, they're still an extremely well organized team, extremely well drilled team, extremely versatile team. They've still got a number of players in good form. Okay, collective performances have dropped off recently, but I feel like this has sort of been coming, and good feel good atmosphere at the Mignal yesterday, and I'm not surprised that somebody was gonna not necessarily be thrashed, but get a beating of some regard relatively soon from Strasbourg. Now that they're over that sort of emotional and psychological barrier of that cup final, having won. So I would bat them to put on a bit of a run between now and the season, given those factors. So yeah, an unusually poor display from Reims, but not overly surprising given the win at the weekend. I think there's a feel-good factor in Strasbourg at the moment.
Yeah, it's almost like a release of pressure as well, isn't it? I think that they were maybe living under a cloud of thinking, well, we've got a chance at Europe, and much like when the team gets relegated, it feels like they've got Europe secured and in the bag now. That's not going away anywhere, and they can sort of play with a little bit of freedom without a worry of any kind of relegation or any real need to fight for any further higher up the table, because they've already surprised a lot of people this season. So the fact that all combined on Wednesday night, where they could play with a bit of relaxation under a great crowd that obviously still celebrating from the weekend, it really gave them a lift and some excellent goals. I thought that they played really well for long periods of that game. Really, I thought that Nuno da Costa had a good game. It's a bit of a shame that Thomasson got himself sent off, but they really clicked at times, and they were really great to watch, and much more like we'd seen in the first half of the season, rather than what we've seen since that nice win in the semi-final against Bordeaux. But much as we mentioned how much the final has positively impacted Strasbourg, we did have a little bit of a worry in the back of our minds how Guingamp would react, whether they won or lost, and arguably they were sort of a touch better than Strasbourg on the evening, in that they ended up losing on penalties. But we had mentioned previously, Adam, that the game on Wednesday against Montpellier might be even more important than the actual cup final itself, and that might be sort of an escape rather than anything like that. But then losing on penalties in anything like this is really difficult, and then they have to face a Montpellier team that can be such a pain to attack against. And the only problem is they got caught by two relatively counter-attacking goals. They were caught a couple of times on that sort of style, so they left themselves open. And what could be seen as, even though Montpellier have been good this season, they've been indifferent more recent than not, but still a missed opportunity for Guingamp to pull themselves back out of the relegation fight. Yeah,
definitely. I think there was certainly, maybe a route for them in that game to get something out of it. And it's unfortunate, but I think that, given that the momentum that's kind of built a little bit, all right, results haven't been amazing since Justin Gorvenec returned by any means. They've still lost a fair few games, but they look like they're competitive again. And although they weren't terrible under Kambare, they definitely seen an improvement, and they look like they're capable of beating, especially the teams in and around them, and getting points at home, which can be a relatively difficult place to go when they're playing well. So although this is a bit of an opportunity missed away at Montpellier yesterday, they would have fancied themselves for a draw given the relative forms of the two teams, but at least performances, like I said, Guingamp's results haven't been amazing, but that mini league now of the three at the bottom, I would argue that Guingamp are favourites to finish top of those three, given Gorvenec's back on board, and they look like they're competitive again, and they're sneaking wins here and there. So I think, although it was a disappointing result yesterday, and it will be difficult to get over the penalty defeat, I think Gorvenec said after the final that he felt they did enough to win it before penalties. And although it was a terrible game, I don't think anybody did enough to win it really before then. But it'd be difficult to go over that disappointment. But I think they're the team that are probably in the best form and have the most momentum, and I chance them to finish in that relegation playoff spot. And it's just whether they can, who they get, and whether they can overcome that. But I think that this is although disappointing, I think they might actually somehow, given they were almost adrift at one point, be okay.
Yeah, it's going to be. They've all three of them have got important games up, especially that special Khan double header we'll keep talking about until it comes up in a few weeks' time, really. But it's going to be a fascinating finish to the end of the season for those three, and it'll be an interesting one for Montpellier now as well, because it was a good win on Wednesday, a good solid win. I thought again it was very much the sort of Delors Laporte show. They were. Much better than they have been in the last couple of weeks, but linking up well again. Two good goals on the counter-attack. They looked dangerous when they were going forward. I think Mollet's been really good in the last couple of weeks. He's been good all season, but especially last couple of weeks. And they've sort of come out of the rut of February with a little bit better form in March. And you look at the games ahead, at least in the next 4 weeks. Nice away is going to be probably the tricky one. They've got Toulouse then, Strasbourg, who maybe slightly on the beach, then it depends on how their momentum carries on, and a PSG game at home where they've beaten PSG before. The Paris Saint-Germain have had a lot of problems with Montpellier in the past, and they probably have already won the league by then. If they win their next two games, PSG are champions. So there's all the chance that Montpellier could be real, not just outsiders really, but potential favourites for the fifth, because you think at Marseille, Reims, they've both got difficult games coming up, not just the weekend, but in the next couple of weeks as well. So there's a chance for them still there.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that group is kind of concertinaing a little bit, and as you mentioned, the running is kind, and sides above them have shown of late that they are capable of dropping points, and if Montpellier can continue in that kind of stoic, very well organized, very combative kind of defensive. Not necessarily defensive, but pragmatic kind of style, then that gets points in this league. The way that Ligue 1 works, there's fullbacks don't get forward all that often, and for some teams, and just being solid is often enough to get you points. And I think Montpellier would definitely be fancying themselves for that fifth place, depending on injuries at Marseille or them not being able to have this form, which seems to be largely driven by the form of Balotelli and. Plus Lopez and Kamara, and Sélection have had some poor results of late, and Reims are overachieving, or they've been brilliant, but they're still overachieving. And last night's result against Strasbourg shows that they're beatable too, and Montpellier will fancy it. And given that they've kind of been in a slump since winning the league in 2012, just going for 7 years now, then this might be their best opportunity to really push on and make a European campaign next season, which would be great. So yeah, they'll definitely fancy themselves, and they'll keep getting results like the one against Gangon last night as well. That's just what they do. That's what Zakarian kind of has done, although it's not always worked out for him, but it's been always sort of been his method. And this season it started to come together with Delors and Laborde up front. He's found a way to score goals as well. So yeah, they might have, whereas last season they kind of fell away, which is what happened with Zakarian at Nantes. Both seasons they looked like they might challenge Europe, and then in the final third of the season they really just disintegrated. They may have had their sort of average run of form, and they may be ready to actually finish a run in on top, which would be really good to see. And he's a good coach. He's an organised coach, and he deserves some success having left Nantes in rather acrimonious fashion, with as is pretty customary with Vadim Keita, unfortunately. But yeah, it'd be great to see Zakarian take his team into Europe.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting, that game of the weekend, because Nice then would at the same juncture think they have a chance to try and
very similar.
A final sort of push as well, but I don't really fancy them as much, to be fair, given some of their results. On to some of the weekend's games, and we've just got three for you this evening, but three particularly interesting ones, starting with Friday night's game between Bordeaux and Marseille. And I wanted to start with the home side on this one, Adam, because we have got Paulo Sousa under the desk, so to speak, now with the 2 games under his belt, but hasn't had the managerial bounce that some might have expected. 2 draws. He was sort of in the crowd for the Monaco draw, but 1-1 against Rennes isn't too much to sniff at, but a pretty dreadful 0-0 against Amiens last weekend. after the international break. Had you expected maybe a little bit more from them, especially last week with him having some extra time with some of those players? I know obviously a few would have gone on international duty, but they've had a reasonable amount of the squad to play with. But he's not really done much so far to really criticise or sort of praise at the moment.
No, it's very true. You're right. I was expecting more. He hasn't. It's very early days. He's had 2 games and they haven't lost yet. And a draw at home to Iran and a draw away at Amiens aren't terrible results by any means. And given that this is an evolving squad, and you imagine a lot of players will go in the summer, I think he's preparing for that. And they'll be bringing in younger players and focusing on younger players, like we saw the signing of Josh Madger from Sunderland over the winter. Yassine Adli as well as another one from PSG, who's like a midfielder who's going to be that. Those sorts of signings are going to be the ones that come in. So he's sort of trending in that direction towards the youth players and figuring out what his team is, because it's a little bit of a free hit for Sousa between now and the end of the season, because they're not going to get relegated, they're not going to challenge for Europe. The squad will be a little bit of turnover, and as I mentioned in the summer, and it'll be next season that really sort of defines his initial kind of period in charge of the club. And but having said that, you would have expected a little bit more intensity and a little bit more sort of happiness. This is a club that's really sort of, the fans are feeling really disenfranchised. I saw a stat today on one of the Bordeaux fan sites that they've in terms of percentage of seats filled at the Stade Atlantique, in terms of percentage, they're second bottom in the league to Toulouse. And because they're just struggling to sell out, the only games they do sell out is PSG and the big teams, basically Lyon, Marseille. Even tomorrow they're expecting like 30,000 for in a 42,000 seat stadium. Last season that attendance pushed 40, and basically fans are fed up with the way the club is going, and Bordeaux fans would argue that they've seen this before: a promising manager, good players, a good squad. If you look at their squad, they're top 6, top 7 in the league, I would argue, with players like Kamano and the way Koundé's developed, and Youssouf Sabaly. Benoit Costa was a very, very good goalkeeper. They've got one of the best, top third in the league, and they've seen this happen before. And I think that Sousa's battle isn't necessarily with the team he puts out in the longer term. Well, obviously it is, but it's only half the battle in some regards, because he needs to sort of relieve the club of their sort of malaise, and it's one that's been going on since Willy Sagnol was in charge. And all right, they got into Europe, but there was a period that had all those injuries, and he ended up getting sacked, and it was a really, there was a lot of unrest with the fan base, and we saw that with Justin Gorfanek, and unrest with the players, with the Brazilian contingent. I remember there was a sort of quite famous social media post where they lost at home, and they were Jonathan Vieira, who was from Ludogorets. I can't really actually his surname, but Malcolm and a couple of other guys was seen sort of laughing and joking, and not taking that seriously. And I kind of think that Touloulan leaving as well, and Gorfanek kind of lost his dressing. And this has happened before. Basically, we've been here before for Bordeaux, and I think that Sousa's got to prove that he's capable of revitalising the team and the club as a whole before. He's got to prove that he's got something to prove, not because of who he is, but because of the job he's taken on. And that's going to be difficult between now and end of the year. But he has got a little bit of time, obviously, because nothing's going to change really in the last 8 or 9 games, and it'll be next season that hopefully, new season, and it'll be a little bit more optimism. But I would have felt with the players he's got available, given that previous managers have seen a little bit more of a bounce. Poyet started really, really well, especially that with a very similar squad, almost exactly the same squad, that we would have seen a little bit more from him. But again, it's early days, and I imagine that it's August and September where we'll sort of see the real Sousa, hopefully, effect.
Yeah, I think we'll give him a couple of weeks more, but it's a little bit frustrating. And I'm sure Bordeaux fans will think the same, that it doesn't seem to have changed anything yet, really. And I can understand that maybe he doesn't think he's got the players for it, or maybe the players have tuned out a little bit. But again, it's a little bit of an occasional problem we see in Ligue 1, where teams that have been poor all season have just gained just about enough points to be nowhere near being worried about it. And we've spoken about it before, but there's that little cluster there, isn't there, just above the sort of just above Monaco, I would say, because Monaco have been incredibly disappointed. But Nantes, Toulouse, and Bordeaux have been a little bit bore fests this season, and Bordeaux, especially given the talent they have involved. And you just want Sosa to play something a bit more enticing, a bit more enthralling. Give them some freedom. They're not going to lose anything at the moment. Let's see what they can do with a bit of the shackles taken off. See if they are able to perform something, if they're worthy of staying at the club next season and building around and unleash players like you say, like a Josh Madra a little bit more. Give him a bit of freedom to try and get your results, because at the moment he's not played yet under Sosa, and he's playing the likes of Jimmy Briand, bringing him on with 15 minutes to go. It doesn't really make any sense. I don't know. He's not your future, really, Jimmy Briand. If anything, he's probably one of those players that might be looking to leave in the summer window. Same with Nicolas de Prévost, which he's obviously a little bit more in favour. But do you not want to try someone like Madja from the start? Do you not want someone like Carmano from the start, a little bit younger, a little bit more of your potential future? It just a little bit ebbed and flowed, really. And they come here against a team that in Marseille that have had a couple of, shall we say, indifferent results recently. Really, the defeat to Paris Saint-Germain was a tough one to take, and for a number of different reasons. But the draw against Angers was a little bit of a gut punch, and then all the rumours about players wanting to leave, especially the most recent ones about Florian Thauvin even being frustrated with his agent that he's not, quote unquote, built up enough interests in bigger European clubs, as he may put it. But at the same time, it's as much as up to him as it is to his agent, and quite frankly, he's not been up to that level in 2019.
No, he really hasn't. And I don't see where Thauvin goes from here. And although, yes, I can understand him wanting to move to a big club, and his form last season, 100%, he was linked quite heavily with Bayern Munich. That would have made sense, given that Robben and Ribéry are on their way out, aging, and Ribéry is leaving in the season. I would love to see Ribéry come back to Marseille. I don't know if that will happen, but that would be great. And it would be classic Marseille, an aging former French international, big name brought in. But from Thauvin's point of view, he's absolutely right. He hasn't been good enough for that move anymore this season. And all right, he's probably, for me, overall, he's probably still, Balotelli maybe aside, if Balotelli can manage form, he's probably still been the most important player this season. He's still got the hat-trick against away at Amiens to win the game 3-1. There have been performances like that, and he's probably contributed to their points tally more than anybody else. But he hasn't dominated games as he did last season, and he hasn't really imposed himself on opposition players and his opposing fullback. And although he's their top scorer of 11 goals, he probably won't match his tally from last season, which is well up into the teens. And I just feel like there's a little bit of a lack of intensity, and perhaps a little bit of he's assuming that, because of how much praise he got last year, that a big move, although he's already at a very big club, I know that they're not in terms of playing staff, they're probably not as high as he would like them to be, but they're still a huge club. But a move to one of the clubs that he sees as a big move, it isn't really in the offing anymore. And where does he go? I mean, he's not going to go to PSG, and if he wants an upward move, then you're looking at the very top 10 or 12, 15 clubs. Otherwise, he's sort of going a little bit sideways, and I don't necessarily see where he goes or who would be interested in where he's a success. So, and that's largely because his form has been, by his standards, it's still been very good, but it's by his standards, that the standards that are needed to get interest from one of those clubs, he needs to be much more influential, and he's not quite the same Thauvin of last year, and it's a little bit rich to be frustrated at your agent for not drumming up enough interest when your performances haven't been anywhere near as good, from which was the initial spark for that interest to begin with, as you said. So yeah, I don't really see him moving on this summer, and given that there's a lot of unrest at Marseille with the way that Garcia's team selection has gone of late. Rolando is very angry about not dropping out the team. Payet's obviously not particularly pleased about not starting. I mean, Luis Gustavo is a proper professional. I doubt he's causing any issues at all. I haven't heard anything, but he won't be happy about not starting either, given how actually he's been really good. All right, not great at centre back, but overall he's been pretty good. Fantastic last year too. So Yeah, I think that there's Tuvan is unnecessarily adding to that, and if he is angling for a move, and because I'm pretty sure he doesn't actually deserve the move he thinks he does deserve. So it'd be interesting to see what happens this summer.
Yeah, you can have as good a salesman as you want if the car's a couple of years old and got a couple of dents in it, and no one's really wanted to go and buy it at the moment. And I think that's the fact with Tovan at the moment. And there's no secret that Bayern Munich are looking for wide players, even though Gnabry's had a good season and Coman is a very talented player. But they've obviously been with Hudson-Odoi, and Tovan's a man that could fit in because he can kind of play either wing if they wanted him to. But at the same time, Bayern Munich taking the fact that can they get someone younger for cheaper that can grow into their style? Can they live with the fact that, in all honesty, it's only been about a year and a half, 2 years that Tovan showed any kind of maturity, and those little stories aren't helping that cause in any way. And going back to Marseille, really, I think a number have mentioned, but they need a bit of a culling in the summer. I think they need a bit of an attitude change. I think that players like they said, like that, so they're Rolando and Paez sort of need to be moved on to pastures new. I'm thinking Mondondo maybe is one as well. Jordan Amavi's had a terrible season, really, by his standards. He needs to book up his ideas, otherwise they might look as well to replacing him. There's a number of things that club needs to do in the summer. There's a number of little moves that they may need to sort of finance, because the first half of their sort of, let's say, grandmaster plan of the sort of return to form with a bit of cash behind them under Frank McCourters, while you got to Europa League final, ultimately it sort of failed, and they may need to look at hitting the reset button come the summertime. Let's get a prediction on this one then, and what do you think the score will be?
1-1.
I'm feeling 2-1 Marseille, just because I think Bordeaux have been so dire, really, more than anything. But there's no doubt that Marseille needs to do something different when it comes to the summertime. On to a game that was interesting last time out, the last time this was played. So should be an entertaining one come Saturday as Reims host Lille. Two sides that are still fighting for spots, shall we say, in the European competitions in the summer, and going to Lille first, Adam, because I know we've already spoken a little bit about Reims, but we'll come back to them. Lille last weekend, it was a bit of again, we mentioned that they've been close to a couple of results and a couple of struggles recently, and they had that blip against Monaco that we half saw come in, but against not. We mentioned on Monday's pod, they showed a bit of character by coming back from 2 goals down away from home. And while not having been anything special really any time this season, it was a good win, and it kept them on course, especially given that Lyon are looking to be biting on their heels, and with Paris Saint-Germain coming up next week as well, which could be a title decider for the away side. They really want the points in this one, because if they don't, they risk a chance of Lyon not only catching them, but by the time this time next week, possibly overpassing them.
Yeah, being overhauled by Lyon, given the lead they had, would be not disastrous, because they've had a great season, but it would be very disappointing given the position they put themselves in. And you're absolutely right; they really did need to show the character, and scoring those 3 goals in 9 minutes, 7, 8, 9 minutes in the second half, having been 2-0 down against Nantes, and they could have quite easily lost that game. And if they had 57 points, that would they'd lose those 3, but they'd only be a point clear of Lyon, and it'd be back on again. And excuse me, with it's obviously given what Genesio and all us have been talking about this week, making the Champions League is pretty crucial for Lyon. And that, although as I briefly mentioned earlier, last season that 3rd place went straight into the group stages, that won't happen this year. So 2nd place is still a very very sort of worthwhile target, given that you go straight into the group stage. You don't have to start your season early. You don't have to have the stress and the pressure and the uncertainty over a Champions League qualifier, although that's slightly better these days, given that the top 4 leagues get excuse me, get a automatic fourth place when you end up playing, as you mentioned before, teams like Valencia and Spurs perhaps, who would be really difficult. So they need to keep up the momentum and that they've shown all the way through the season, and it's sort of coming to the final stretch now, and this is kind of the crunch time for them. If they can maintain that form and maintain the results, and they can and Gautier can keep getting the performances from players like Pepe and Bamba and Akone and Thiago for the rest of the season, that'll define their year. Because slip into third, and they go out in the groups in the qualifiers, maybe Pepe's left, and next season they're in the Europa League, and perhaps they don't have the resources that they would want over summer, given the FFP, given that the GNCG, the financial watchdog for French football, is still kind of on their back, and this is a huge opportunity for them. Is basically the point I'm getting to, and it would be a real shame to see them slip now, and because they've been fantastic, and that character that you mentioned they showed against Nantes to come back from 2-0 down and win the game 3-2, that needs to be the same for those last 8 games, and for them to get that second place, which is all important.
Yeah, it was really good to see them have a little bit of a different win. They've had a couple of games where they've blown teams out of the water. They've had a couple where it's been close and they've nicked it by one through perseverance. But this is one of I think it's the first time I can think of, at least, where they were sort of really tested, really on the back ropes, and have managed to claw it back as well. And credit to Nicolas Pepe, who scored the penalty as well, set up the winner as well. He's also been nominated in the sort of Ligue African Player of the Year, and there's a number of good nominations, really strong ones, but I don't think any of them come close to the Ivory Coast international, who's probably on to pastures new in the summer, even might be taking Tovan's place at Bayern Munich, you might say, but there's going to be someone that is very happy about how he's improved. And I think sometimes we forget how good of a season he's had, because I know I don't want to sort of isolate you out on this one more than anything, because I'll throw myself in this fire, that we had questioned how Nicolas Pepe had been linked with decent clubs, and eventually went to Lille and didn't really have the greatest of first seasons, and we weren't certain with how he was really perceived at Angers, really pushing again. But then here we are 6-8 months later, and he looks like a world beater. So clearly we need to get our eyes tested a little bit more, or maybe have some more of this inside knowledge that others possess. But it's going to be a difficult time, you would expect, at least anyway, against Reims. But they kind of played it completely against type in midweek. The first time they've lost in the league since December, which is an incredible feat for the team. They've been on an excellent run, but I suppose you can never really say this. I think being worried is the wrong word for it. But is there a case that maybe that Reims are taking their eyes off the prize?
I don't think so. I think that this is. I think we have to, for now. I think we kind of have to write this just result off as a little bit of a culmination of factors. The Strasbourg sort of release of that pressure that you mentioned earlier from winning the cup and winning the cup final. They kind of caught them at the wrong time. Although it is a little odd, because Reims had 17 days between games. All right, they had some internationals, but because they didn't have a game at the weekend, they had quite a long break. Most of the team that weren't away, so maybe they're a little bit sluggish after that. I don't know, but a break at this stage of the season of that length should be really, really beneficial. So I think that given that we have to kind of take their season as a whole, even though they were poor in this game. Only PSG have lost less games than them this season, and up until yesterday, Reims had lost less games than Lille and Lyon, who 6-5, and it's now 6 for each of them. And they've proven time and time again that they're extremely solid and compact, and can win in a variety of ways and get points in kind of different ways. And since Alba Zanelli's come in, I really think he's revolutionised the team and the way that they play. He's got so much vision and so much sort of plays with so much intensity, and is capable of creating something from nothing, which he didn't really have before. So I think that the fact is that if you look at the team and the way that they've been playing and the way things have been going, that it's still a very, very positive situation for them. Obviously, a promoted team in the top 6, but I don't think that David Guillon would be careless enough to let his team drop in intensity for the last 8 games. And I think they've got some experienced pros there like Alexis Ramau and Younes Abdelhamid, who have been around a lot. Chavaria as well, Pablo Chavaria. You'd expect them to be leading from the front and to finish the job, if you like. Well, one thing I perhaps would say a little bit more tactically is that their team's very, very finely balanced. And I think when Zanelli came in, he started on the bench for the first 3 games and didn't make much of an impact for the first 2. He only got a few minutes. Okay, he might have been sort of settling in, but I feel like the way David Guillon set up his team is that introducing a new factor or a player that interprets the role slightly differently can unbalance the team quite easily. And I think that the way that they kind of coped with the lack of a person who plays at sort of the most forward of the three midfielders yesterday. You know, Tristan Dingong came in from Troyes last season and has sort of been doing that quite well. He works really hard, gets through a lot of sort of work in midfield, but isn't necessarily the archetypal attacking midfielder. But he adds balance to the team. He lets people like Zanelli and Moussa Doumbia, when he's been not injured and on form, and Remy Udan, who often plays wide too, to a little bit more freedom. And you know, Mathieu Caffrey does a very similar job, a little bit more expansive, but he does a very similar job there. And I think yesterday they were a little bit unbalanced with Doumbia, Zanelli, and Udan all playing together, and perhaps that left Ramal and Chavalan in midfield a little bit exposed. And I think that's the kind of thing that you know, Guillon's recognised, and it's the kind of thing they need to be a little bit aware of going on in the running, and try and not get too excited, if you like, and not be too forward thinking, because they've built this success on being pragmatic and not conservative, but you know, horses for courses, and I feel like that they need to be a little bit careful there. And I think that's something that Guillon's proven he's really, really good at, of picking the right team and balancing, although they've got a very consistent team, but keeping that balance. And I think that's something they need to do for the rest of the season. If they do, they'll be fine. I don't know if they'll finish in the top 5, but they'll continue in the same vein as they have previously.
Yeah, and it just sort of, like you say, it's almost like resetting the balance, isn't it? Giving them the reminder that they are an excellent defensive side, and then against a team like Lille, they're more likely to revert to type a little bit more and use those expansive plays to sort of break away and hope they can nick a goal. And the sort of teams that Lille have struggled against as well. That's not exactly the kind of team that Lille have really favoured this season. You look at the game against Dijon, they really, really struggled for a long time. They drew against Montpellier, who set up the same way. It's going to be a really tight one, this one, really. It might not be as expensive after that result as we maybe might have hoped so. But what do you think the score will be in this one, Adam?
I think it's going to be really interesting. I'd say I still fancy Lille, so 2-1 Lille.
I have a feeling it'll be a 1-0 win for Lille. I agree. It's going to be one of those ones where maybe they nick another goal and Lille keep the train rolling, which will keep it interesting, given that if they did lose to Paris Saint-Germain, they do have that game coming up against Lyon, which would be a nice little fight for second and third, although both are Champions League places at least anyway. On to our final game of this weekend, at least anyway, and an interesting one for both sides, really, because Guingamp versus Monaco gives what you might see is Guingamp another chance, really, because Monaco last weekend, Adam, pulled up a little bit of a stinker, really, against a Caen side that themselves hadn't won since December, almost the exact opposite to Reims. They came away with a grinding out 1-0 win, and a lot of people would mention that it was an excellent goalkeeping performance as well from the Caen stopper that allowed that victory to happen. But at the same time, it was a reminder for Monaco that the job isn't really done under Jardim yet, and there's a lot of work still to be done.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case, and it's easy to forget with the sort of furore around Jardim's return and Thierry Henry, who's very high profile in this country and obviously in France too, of his sort of failure as coach and how much attention that got, and the fact that, you know, Dimitri Roboliev had to sort of convince Jardim to come back, and it's that kind of sort of sideshow is detracted from the fact that Jardim was in charge at the start of the season, and they were pretty poor then as well. And it's okay that they've signed a lot of players and things have changed, and they're taking his ideas on board, which perhaps they didn't quite as much previously, or at least over the summer when Michael Emenalo was a sporting director. And, you know, like Yuri Tielemans is a good example. You know, he was sent out to Leicester on loan, mainly because although he's a talented guy, and I don't think Jardim really fancied him, and you know, there's a little bit more sort of power in for Jardim going forward, but there's still a lot of work to do, and as you mentioned, and not a vast amount is going to change between that Henry team and this team, given that it's relatively similar in terms of personnel. Okay, they signed in the window, but between the Jardim Monaco that started the season and the Jardim Monaco of now, you know, he still lived in Monaco over the course of the season. You know, I imagine the players running into him, you know, around the city. But it's for Jardim. he still has an issue. That hasn't been resolved yet. Because if they start next season in a similar way, they might be similarly unlucky with transfers. They don't come off in certain regards, and we could be right back to a similar situation where Monaco are struggling again, not to the same extent, but not meeting expectations that they've come to make sort of the norm for them. Then it comes back to Jardim perhaps isn't the right fit. And all right, he's done an amazing job previously in his first stint, and it's all very interesting and sort of newsworthy that Robolio basically begged him to come back, but that doesn't mean he's going to do well in the longer term. And this season is it's a little bit like Sosa there. He's got a little bit of a free hit because they're not going to get relegated now. That their squad is far too good for them to be anywhere near the bottom three coming into the season. But this defeat to Con is a little bit of a wake up call that there's still a lot of things that need changing, and that he didn't have answers at the start of the season, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he does now.
Yeah, there's a number of little bits of tweaks that still need to be done. I think that we lulled ourselves into a false sense of security that Monaco were back to the ways that they could be, but there's definitely some tweaks that need to be done. And there's the rumours that Martins is not going to be a permanent signing for them, which opens a gap there, and they've not really got anyone to sell, which might be a good thing more than anything. They just need to work a couple of things out a little bit more than anything. But in terms of for Guingamp, that creak of the door at least opening there will help them enormously, really, because if they can get a result against Monaco, it pushes them back into that relegation playoff zone, which is where any of those three teams at the bottom want to be, really. But also, at the same time, a victory here puts them on 25 points. They're only 5 points off Monaco. I want to say it quietly that it might drag someone else in, but if there is a chance, this is pretty much last chance for Guingamp to pull someone back into the mire with them.
Yeah, if they want to stay up automatically, if you like, finish in the top 17, then you'd imagine that this is getting towards sort of kind of last chance saloon. And although the teams above Monaco on similar numbers of points, Monaco on 30 points, Amiens on 30, Nantes on 31, Toulouse on 32, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that that one of those teams could get sucked back in with the final late games. As we mentioned previously, that a few of those teams have been pretty poor this season and are capable of terrible runs of results. So you're absolutely right. It is trending towards like their last sort of chance to stay up automatically. And as I said, I still fancy them to finish in 18th, given the way things are going. And they beat Monaco earlier in the season, didn't they? And they beat on penalties in the cup as well. And maybe there's some psychological kind of boost for them thinking about those two results. And given that Monaco, like I said, you were right. I think we kind of lulled ourselves into a false insecurity that we're back to Monaco now. This is Jardim's Monaco again, and now they'll challenge for the title next season, or they'll be in the Champions League next season. Places next season. That's not necessarily the case, and there's a win here for Guingamp potentially, given that they've been a little bit better at home. They've stuck a couple of 1-1 wins against Dijon and against Angers at home, and who's to say that they can't get a similar result here?
Yeah, and that's going to be the real thorn for the other teams, especially if they do get a result here. Dijon facing Lyon, you don't really expect anything from them there, especially with the form there, and Caen facing away at Nîmes, and that's it could be a chance given their form, but at the same time we know how Caen have been, that they do sort of pop up with the right sort of results, but there's not massive realms of possibility that they can't get a win there. And if both of those two got a win, it A, would really sink Dijon, but B, like you say, it starts dragging a couple of those extra teams back into the fold, and that will make a really, really interesting end to the season if they do carry on struggling, those teams still above them. What would your prediction be in this one then, Adam? Do you think Guingamp get it done?
I'm going to say 2 each.
I'm going to go for a 2-0 Monaco win. I think that the loss in midweek and the loss in the cup final, I think may have negatively affected Guingamp more than we might have realised just yet. And a defeat here with the results that they have to get after that, really, they'll be laser focused really. That Strasbourg game, maybe a revenge game, but then their attention completely shifts to that Caen game really, because you can't see much points coming out of Marseille or away at Nice at least anyway. So then they really have to win that game against the Breton side if they get the chance to really to face the Normandy side and still have a chance of staying up. So I'm going for the 2-0 Monaco win. That's all for this evening. My thanks to Adam and all of you listening at home. Join us for the main show, which will be back on Monday. But for now, enjoy your weekend of football.